There's one photo.
Oh, it is?
He's controlling back there. Good morning and welcome to the Dean's Forum at St. John's Cathedral. I am Katie Pearson, canon pastor here, and so delighted that all of you are present with us in person this morning, and a special welcome to all those who are joining us online. I always feel the need to look around, like somehow those people are all up there. A special thank you to Mary Welker Haddock, who said yes to the invitation to join the Dean's Forum team. There is still space for others to join as well. If you don't mind welcoming a speaker and being present and passing around a microphone for Q&A, please see Tina Clark and let her know that you would be willing to do that on occasion. I'm delighted this morning to welcome our Dean's Forum guest, Laura James. She has enjoyed a long career as a painter and illustrator. A self-taught artist, her African and Caribbean American heritage and love of color, design, and story inform her work. Originally captivated by the Ethiopian Christian art form, she is well known for her work in that area, and her religious art is at the forefront of the movement toward a more inclusive representation of biblical figures. In addition to painting sacred images from various religions, she portrays Black women, families, and scenes of everyday life, blending intricate patterns, text, vibrant colors, and sometimes surreal imagery into what she calls art for the people. Many of these paintings address race and class, and she uses her love of storytelling to portray difficult situations in a relatable way. Specifically this morning, I think we're going to be focusing on a children's book that says Tina's copy on mine, that is truly spectacular, both in the subject matter and in the illustrations. Often relegated to the background, nannies and domestic workers are seldom the topic of children's stories. However, Laura James pays homage to her childhood in Brooklyn and to her mother, a homemaker who wore many hats. In My Mother Was a Nanny, her new and vibrant and spirited picture book. So this morning she will speak about how she came to write this book, what it means to tell a children's story with big topics, including economy, religion, immigration, and love. Welcome to St. John's. We are so happy you're here, Laura.
Thank you for having me. Oh, I'm so pleased to be here. I was here virtually a couple of years ago talking about my religious work, so I'm really happy to be here to speak about this new project, which is very dear to my heart. You'll come to understand why. And this is the first time I'm doing this presentation, so I'm going to stick to the script. Okay. Yes, and thanks again for seeing the importance of the subject and highlighting nannies and domestic workers. That was a goal of mine when I first started the series Nannies and Other Mothers in 2001. I like to paint in series and to paint stories, and this was my mother's story and the story of the other women in my family, and it was my story too, because I grew up with it. A couple of years ago, an editor at Groundwood Books from Canada in Toronto, they reached out to ask if I wanted to illustrate a manuscript, and I read it. It was a good story, but I declined at the time. And a couple of weeks later, a publisher called and said that they were looking at my website and saw this nanny series and wanted to know if I wanted to write and illustrate a book about a nanny. And I said, yes, I do. So this is how My Mother Was a Nanny came to be. So these are some images from the original series. This is a painting called Stroll, and property from the collection of a gentleman. It might be kind of hard to see, but in the ground here, I put the children of the, nanny's children under the manhole cover there. I like to show them in the paintings as well, because they are always present in the mind, in my opinion. In this painting here, you can see the little girl behind the mother's there. I like to collect auction catalogs, so I this was the perfect opportunity to pull out the catalogs and paint some of these objects. Next slide, please. And these are two other pieces from the series. The party and the nanny. So I probably will make more. I guess I've been making them since 2002 for about 20 years, I guess. Okay, next slide, please. So this piece is a more historic piece based in American slavery, which is another painting topic of mine. It's called Extended Family, and it shows how the master had children with his enslaved women, which was not a secret, obviously, but there is shame there. It is shameful. And this type of legacy, it may elicit shame. And we know, women didn't really have a choice in this, but to rear someone else's children, whether black or white, because, somebody has to rear the children. Children can't take care of themselves. Babies can't take care of themselves. So women who do domestic work are vital to the economy because they allow others to work outside of the home. It's as simple as that. And I think that's something to be celebrated, not to be hidden and to be, dismissed as something that is bad. That wasn't written here, but okay. Next slide, please. So I exhibited the paintings many times and sold most of them, but I still wanted to show the work. So my sister and I developed a project where we worked with a group of women from Domestic Workers United, which is an organization, a national organization that organizes domestic workers. At this time, when I first met with these women, they really had no rights. And so they wrote out a Bill of Rights that they went to Albany to agitate the legislator to change these rules. There weren't really a whole lot of rules. People can hire you, they can fire you, they can do all kinds of things. So they really organized around making it more fair to the workers. So I was happy to go with them and lobby in Albany. And my sister and I, what we did was I guess it was like a focus group with some of these women. We showed them the paintings and asked them to talk about their impressions. And then we transcribed them and we made prints of the work and hung their words alongside the prints. And I was very touched by what they wrote because I realized that I really did capture something. They could really identify with it, and they really appreciated it. So this was an exhibit at Borough Manhattan Community College. There's a big social work component at the school, and so I think this was a group of social work students that came through, and you see some of the women in the picture up there. It was really a great time, and I could just see that they were very proud. I'm not going to cry. I might need a tissue, somebody. Okay, next picture, please. And these were two other exhibits that we did at Riverside Church in New York, where we had a panel discussion, and here in Little Haiti at a cultural center, we also mounted the show. So we can go to the next slide. Next slide, please. And then the next. Okay. So my parents were born in the Caribbean, in Antigua, which was a British colony. And after World War II, Britain needed workers to rebuild the country. So they invited people from the Caribbean to emigrate to England, and the people who went were known as the Windrush generation. And basically, it was sort of like a great migration that lasted from about 1945, after the war until about 1971. And my parents, they first went to England at that time. This is actually my father over here in this picture on the end. My father, when he was I want to say he was an orphan. I need a tissue now for sure. Okay, well, his mother had died, but his father was alive. But he told me that when he was 13, he was a sharecropper. And this was about 1945. So here he is, 13, cutting sugarcane. But, you know, when he was 18, he was able to buy his ticket to Antigua, to England. Thank you. Why am I crying? I hate this. It's a good story. Yes, he said when he was 18, he was able to buy his ticket to England. And so, you know, for all the ridicule he had taken until that time, you know, nobody else could do that. Like, none of his contemporaries could do that. So he was very proud of himself that he could do that. And, you know, the rest is history, I guess. Okay, let me see, where am I? I gotta wipe my eyes. Yeah, next slide, please. This is a painting that I just stuck in here. I wanted to include it. It's called For the Elder Sister, who stays at home when the rest of the family goes to foreign. Because many people, especially women, couldn't leave the island and they had to stay to take care of the old people and the children. Okay, next slide. So my mother was the third of 8 children, and in the early 60s, she left Antigua to find work. There was no work in Antigua, she said. If there was work in Antigua, I would have stayed. So she took the 10-day boat ride like her older siblings and got a job sewing in the same factory where her sister worked. She said she was treated well enough, but it was too cold and foggy. So, you know, one day, actually, she got caught in a horrible fog, and she said she prayed to God that if he helped her to get out of this fog, she would leave England as soon as possible, and that's what she did. And this painting is called London Fog. Next slide, please. So once out of the fog, she sailed on a visitor's visa to America and found employment and started sending money home. And in this painting called Broken Things, it shows some of the items that she got from her employers, you know, and that later ended up broken after we got our hands on them. Next slide, please. So she worked out at a home on Long Island and lived with her aunt in Brooklyn on the weekends, and her other sisters came and sort of repeated the same pattern, and she worked like this until a friend introduced her to my father. And, you know, my father may have been considered an uneducated laborer, but he managed, like many of his contemporaries, to buy several apartment buildings in Bed-Stuy and Prospect Heights, Brooklyn. So they cleaned houses and bought houses simultaneously. And another little interesting story, when my father first came to America, his grandfather was already living here in Harlem. So, you know, like I said, people have been coming for a very long time. And I guess after a little while, he came home one day and his bed was wet. Someone had put water on his bed, so that meant it was time to go. Okay. Next slide. So this is actually the first page in the book. Our elementary school was across the street from our house, and my mother was well known and liked by my sister's teachers. So one day, my sister's pregnant teacher asked her if she would watch her baby after he was born because she had to work. So my mother, being industrious, said yes. And the teacher later told me that my mother actually came to visit her in the hospital after the baby was born. And she said that it was unheard of for women to go back to work so soon after having a baby. So she was pretty lucky to have found my mother. And she remembered looking out the window across the empty lot at our apartment building and knowing that her child was safe. Next slide, please. So since I was too young to go to school for that first year, I was at home with my mother and the children. And this is a memory that's always stayed with me. As soon as everybody left, she said, "Let's get cracking." Next slide, please. This is My Mother Was a Friend. And this is another very strong memory of mine, waiting in the hallway while the teachers talked to my mother about grown-up stuff. You know, everything, all kinds of things I wasn't supposed to hear. So I got shooed away a lot, which is not a great feeling. And speaking with one of the teachers later, she said, "Your mother was like a goddess to me. I was divorced, I didn't know anything about babies, and she told me what to do." This is what she said. Next slide, please. But I could see that they were really friends. Even at that age, I could tell that. And we went to their summer home in Woodstock most summers, birthday parties, etc. And they were our elementary school teachers. So, next slide, please. We learned to love books, music, art. It was really a great public school experience. And I can say that we loved our teachers. When my mother was older and visiting New York, they came to visit. You can see in that picture two of them. And in these pictures over here, you can see the girl, well, they're not girls anymore, but two of the girls that my mother watched came to a couple of my exhibits earlier this year. And these pictures are from just a couple of weeks ago when I went out to Brooklyn to sign a couple of these books for them, which they're very happy and proud of to be involved in this book. Next slide, please. But when I was 5 years old, it was confusing. And I probably didn't even realize that this was a job where my mother was getting paid, because it seemed like she was watching her friends' kids, and then after school, they still came over and hung out. So it was kind of weird. In contrast, my cousin, who is Aunt Catherine in the book, also took care of other people's children, working as a live-in nanny on Long Island. But their conversations were a little darker, the conversations she had with my mother. And I heard some not so nice things that happened, and references to my lady. And I could also tell she was tired. But she was a large presence in my young imagination, and I thought of her as a beautiful, worldly woman. We had about 3 other relatives who came and lived with us in this way, and until they got their citizenship. And obviously, my original Nanny series was also a tribute to them. Next slide, please. I'm going to try not to cry. So in this spread, I imagined some of the things she did during the week. And these are all based on paintings from the original Nanny series that I showed earlier. And I was really happy to be able to stick them into this book. Next slide, please. So my mother was constantly on the go, also, and doing one thing or the other, whether for the immediate family, the extended family, her church family, or her friends. Next slide. Always industrious, making and doing. She made many wedding dresses and cakes and favors and other crafts. And this piece is called "My Mother Was a Maker." Next slide, please. This is "My Mother Was a Baker," another clear childhood memory of her making pizza, us making pizza, really. And she really made the best pizza. It was legendary in Brooklyn, I will say. Okay, next slide, please. So again, back to the Nanny series. I remembered my mother when making this piece, Maypole Mother, over there, where, just like kids running around, and she's got something, she's knitting, she's doing something with her hands. And, and also I saw myself in her when I worked on this painting here called "I Live in a Closet," because I also do a lot of making. And, the kids run around there, and they're in your face, but you sort of, I don't want to say ignore them, but you get on with it, even though they're around. So, next slide, please. So, in this next spread, Catherine calls her daughter long distance and says, "If there was work in Antigua, I would have stayed." And this is one of my favorite pieces from the book. It shows both of the countries and kind of closes the distance between them. And, you can see the barrel, the daughter sitting on the barrel, because when you're in a situation like this, you send a barrel home with lots of things, things from foreign, as they say. So next slide, please. So "I would have stayed." This is a photo from a family reunion in Antigua, probably in the early 90s, my mother and her sisters and brothers. I think most of them would have stayed in Antigua if they could, but they were here and making the best of it. And I just wanted to say too that, during slavery, thousands of people were brought to these small islands, and these islands really couldn't sustain these people. They just really didn't, they weren't big enough. And since that time, people have always traveled to work. Even in slavery times, people went to different islands in different countries because there was just too many people. Next slide, please. So here are some family pictures. They worked hard, regular jobs, side hustles. They bought houses, educated their children, were active in their churches, had big holiday celebrations, took vacations, and generally productive members of society. And I think their children still are, because many of them have passed away. But these are just some family pictures. I wanted to include that one over there with the funky pattern on the couch. I have a couch in my book which has lots of patterns. We had, all of the couches were crazy, like crazy couches with plastic on them. And this is a picture of my grandparents in front of one of my uncle's houses in Brooklyn, because they would come to visit, especially as they got older. Okay, next slide, please. So again, these are scenes that have stayed with me, and an inspiration for the piece in the book called My Mother Was a Sister at Aunt Eileen and Uncle John's house. Next slide, please. And it says, my mother was a sister. On Saturday nights, we went to Uncle John and Aunt Eileen's house to visit. More aunts and uncles and cousins came with food, and it turned into a party. Next slide, please. On Saturday mornings, I would go with my mother to her cleaning job in Manhattan. She cleaned a graphic design office, which, I didn't know it, but I didn't know it at the time. But anyway, it was our time together, and I look forward to these Saturday mornings, Saturday morning trips to Mr. Waters' office. Next slide, please. So, like I say, it was a graphic design office, and there was literally a room full of discarded stuff to be thrown out by my mother. So, she let me take discarded art supplies, and that really got me interested in making art and crafting. And, I remember a swing line stapler that I literally had for 25 years. I had this stapler, Yeah, actually, the publishers at Groundwood, they asked if I would write sort of a sequel about how I got interested in art as a child. After they saw this spread, they were like, oh, let's do another one. I was like, okay, in a little while. Yes. And so, in retrospect, I am grateful for all of these experiences. I didn't know it at the time, but they were more, everything that I talked about really did leave a big impression on me, Next slide, please. So as I wrap up here, I continue to be creative and work on many interesting projects. And here I'm showing the two other children's books I illustrated, Anna Carries Water and Bunununu's Hair, both written by Olive Sr. and published by Tradewind Books, and they're both stories of self-empowerment for girls. And it had been a dream of mine to show original paintings from these two books at the Brooklyn Public Library on Grand Army Plaza, which is the main library in Brooklyn, the main branch. Beautiful building. And as a child, you walk into these, it was magical, let's just say that, very magical. And I thought, oh, I'd love to show some paintings here. So, next slide, please. So I am so pleased that my dream has come true with this exhibition, which is currently up through January 28th. And there's also other work from the other two books. So this is in the children's wing at the library, which honestly, my parents, they let us go to church in the library. So this was every day we're here at the library. So it's just so, and my children too, I took them to this library. So it's just a beautiful thing, really. Okay, next slide, please. And I think that one might be blank. Next. Okay, and then next slide. So now really in closing, in the book, Mummy is sewing throughout the book, which, may or may not be obvious. The story says, Mummy had been making us Easter outfits all along. She looked so beautiful and had the same pretty dress, and I had the same pretty dress as she did. I may be busy, Mummy said, but I always have time for you. That's the last line in the book. So this is a story with a lot of angst, saying to go away on every page. But she was always thinking about us, and she did love and care about us. And speaking with friends about the book, and, just sort of saying, is it, it's kind of weird that she's telling her to go in every page, even though she usually has a smile on her face. But, every friend that I say this to, they're like, my mother was the same way. Everybody. It's like, my mother also, and they would tell me long, drawn-out stories about their mother telling them to go away for one reason or the other. So, I didn't feel quite as put upon after hearing all of that. And one friend of mine, after reading the book, a friend from Minnesota, she sent this photo here that you can see with 8 of her aunts, all wearing the same Easter dress cut from the same pattern. So there you go. We really do have more in common than we think. Okay, next slide, please. So this is the last slide. My parents at their home in Antigua. I do want to read this review from the School Library Journal, written, I'm going to cry, I'm just thinking about it, written by Summer Edwards, who's also from the Caribbean, and it's just beautifully written and well put. So I would like to just take a second to read this, if I can find it. Okay, it says, Afro-Antiguan American self-taught artist Laura James shares her childhood experience of growing up in Brooklyn with a mother who was a homemaker, domestic worker, and nanny. James's first-person narrative debunks harmful stereotypes of Caribbean nannies as tough, lazy, or difficult. Although James's mother often took a no-nonsense approach to parenting and was too time-strapped to spend as much time with her 3 daughters as she would have liked, James humanizes her as a woman of many talents, a reliable neighbor, a caring friend, and devoted mummy, who juggled a demanding set of priorities and gave everything she had for the sake of her children. Complete with warm acrylic illustrations in James's signature style, this picture book is an unvarnished but compassionate tribute to the complexity of motherhood. I think that was very well stated. So thank you for listening. I'm very proud of my mother, as you can tell, and my family. And so my mother, and in the dedication it says, Eileen Leona Marcella James, otherwise known as Aunt Catherine, Nana, Mrs. James, Sister James, Cat, and Mommy. Are you crying too? The end.
If you hold up your hand, I'll
You
bring
can go to
the
the next
mic.
slide. It's just an end.
Any questions? Oh, I think you covered it all.
Yeah,
Laura?
I think so.
Oh, there is one. Okay.
Hi, my name is Bruce Hefner. Laura, thank you so much for speaking to us. Wonderful story. I'm involved in a program where we have conversations with immigrants who are learning English. And currently we have several students who live in Brooklyn. And I would like to suggest that they see your exhibit at the library there. So you said it's at the Brooklyn Public...
The main branch of the Brooklyn Public Library on Grand Army Plaza. And on Saturday, December 9th, we're going to have a book event. So maybe they can come at 3 o'clock.
Okay, great.
Yes,
Well,
looking
I'll make sure I tell them about that.
Thank you.
But thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Tony. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about who your intended audiences were for the book, and then what kind of reception has it gotten? Who has most strongly embraced this book so far?
Yeah, that was a good. I was thinking about that too as I'm writing this book. It's like, who's reading this book? And they say 3 to 6 year olds. I'm like, really, 3 to 6 year olds? But they do. They do understand, and they ask questions too, which is good. Which is the point, really, to ask questions and to have conversations. I also imagine that nannies will be reading this book to children, and that is a conversation starter there. And the book has gotten. All of the reviews so far have been pretty good. So, it's been out for just about a month. So, it's a new book.
My name is Susan, and I have wondering how your journey was from finding materials in the drafting room to being a published
Yeah.
painter.
Yeah. Don't cry. Okay. So definitely my God-given talent. I've come to realize that, so I'm very grateful. But when I was about 18, I was just walking down the street in my neighborhood in Brooklyn, and I saw a book called Ethiopian Magic Scrolls, which was featuring Ethiopian Christian art. Long story short, I bought this book, and I just started painting. And, my parents actually left when I was 17 and my sister was 19. They went back to Antigua. My father was building this house. They left us when we were 17 and 19. We were very happy at the time, but we realized that wasn't great. But because they left us in the house, I didn't really have to have a job, because they were paying for it. So I had the ability to, get this book and paint on the walls and, buy canvas and, just to do it as fun and as a hobby. Within the first year, I actually was invited to a little exhibition in the neighborhood, and somebody bought that painting. It was Mary and Jesus, actually. And I was encouraged that I could keep doing this. And, also seeing my parents working from home, I knew that I could do that. It wasn't like I could work from home. So it all worked together to get me here today. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, thank you for speaking with us this morning. I know for new authors, sometimes there's great fear in putting your personal story out there and the fear of rejection. If you could talk about your journey and getting over any fear you might have experienced.
Yeah, even preparing this presentation, because it is the first time that I'm showing pictures of my family and all this, I was like, first I was like, well, who wants to know about this anyway? Like, is this interesting? But it is a universal story, so I was kind of, do I really want to talk about all of this? But everybody has these experiences, has some experience with a caregiver, with a nanny, with domestic work, so I do believe that probably every single one of you can identify with something that I've said here today. So it's not as scary, even though I'm crying. Tears of joy. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Sarah. I'm noticing a bit of a through line in some of your work that we were looking at, where, at least to my eyes, it looks kind of like the people are flying, or there's like sort of a swooping image to them. Could you speak to a little bit about that, if there's any story to that, or if it's just the thrill of that line? I don't know.
Well, sometimes it is. It's just like the design aspect of it. But I do like to kind of feel light, and not so heavy and put upon all the time. Because, even as my mother was a nanny and cleaning houses and apartment buildings, whatever, my mother was a very happy lady. She had lots of friends, it was work. And I've said before, my mother had envelopes of money around the house because she had money, because she was working all the time. So she wasn't in my opinion, and I could be wrong because I don't know, but she didn't seem like she was like totally stressed out all the time. So in showing, just like the lightness, the levity of it, of life, I guess, I like to be able to show that sometimes because, a lot of these subjects are difficult. So, I hope that answered your question.
So, Laura, I'm curious, is there a different feeling as you are painting religious scenes and painting these deeply personal scenes? Not that religion can't be personal, but of people that you love and are fully present in your life. I'm wondering if there's a different...
There definitely is a difference. There is a difference. I don't know that I can say what it is exactly. Maybe, this type of work is more from my own imagination. All of it is like the whole story, let's say. Whereas in the Bible and doing religious work, I'm using that text, and I am using my imagination, obviously, and making an image, but the story is not really my story, So that is the main difference, I think. Even though, you try to make a Bible story your story, but I didn't write it. Yeah, definitely a difference. And then also with the religious work, I outlined everything with the black line in the Ethiopian Christian art style, and this work doesn't have the line, so it looks different too, in my opinion. Okay, well, thank you guys so much for listening. I hope it
We hope that you will join us for the next service.